A modern airport is a theater of the absurd, but the real show begins in the airline's complaint box. We're not talking about lost luggage or flight delays. No, we found 55 complaints that are so detached from reality that they defy all logic. From overly calm pilots to rage over a scary dream, this is a journey into the world of what happens when common sense misses its connecting flight. These are the dumbest complaints ever filed. 1. A passenger on an overnight flight filed a complaint against the airline for the content of his dream. He claimed the engine's low-frequency hum and the cabin's lighting induced a nightmare where the flight attendants had been replaced by angry, honking geese in tiny uniforms. He seriously argued that the airline is responsible for creating a holistically peaceful travel environment, which includes the subconscious. He demanded compensation for dream-induced trauma and suggested they invest in subliminal acoustic therapy to ensure all passengers have pleasant, goose-free dreams. 2. On a transatlantic flight, a man in business class was so offended by the flight attendant that he demanded to speak to the captain upon landing. His grievance wasn't rudeness or poor service. His complaint was that the flight attendant was, in his words, unrealistically attractive, and it was making him feel insecure about his own appearance. He claimed her perfect smile and flawless posture were a constant, silent judgment of his own slouching and dad bod, ruining his premium travel experience. He actually suggested the airline hire more average-looking people for long-haul flights. 3. A man filed a formal complaint about the excessive noise coming from the engines during his flight from Chicago to Miami. He wrote that the constant loud humming made it difficult for him to nap. His suggested solution was pure genius. He asked if the pilots could simply turn the engines down a bit, or perhaps put them on a quieter setting once they reached cruising altitude. You have to wonder if he understood what was keeping the 300-ton metal tube in the air. 4. Imagine being served a complimentary dessert at 35,000 feet. A nice little cup of ice cream. Sounds lovely, right? Not for one passenger. She called the flight attendant over to complain that her ice cream was aggressively cold. Not just cold, but aggressively so. She insisted it was causing her tooth shock, and that the airline should have a system for serving ice cream at a more ambient, tongue-friendly temperature. The flight attendant's suggestion to simply let it sit for a few minutes was met with a glare of pure disbelief. 5. A traveler flying into Las Vegas for the first time was deeply disappointed and filed a complaint against the airline for a misleading view. During the plane's descent, all he could see was desert and mountains. He had apparently expected to see the iconic Las Vegas Strip, with all its neon lights and fountains, directly underneath the plane for the entire landing approach. He accused the airline of flying a boring route and hiding the good parts of the city, as if the pilot was a tour guide intentionally avoiding the main attractions. 6. After a perfectly smooth flight, a passenger wrote a one-star review because the pilot's voice over the intercom was, and I quote, too reassuring. He felt the captain's calm, deep, and confident tone was suspicious. He argued that a pilot who sounds that relaxed must be hiding something, or isn't taking the incredible danger of flying seriously enough. He would have preferred, he wrote, a pilot who sounded a little more on edge, because that would prove he was paying attention. 7. This one comes from a passenger who was upset that the in-flight movie selection was too good. He was on an overnight flight and had planned to sleep, but he found the movie option so compelling that he stayed up all night watching back-to-back blockbusters. He landed exhausted and irritable, and blamed the airline's irresponsibly excellent entertainment system for his fatigue. He genuinely demanded a partial refund for his ticket because the airline had, in his view, sabotaged his ability to rest. 8. A family flying to Orlando was upset when the captain made an announcement while flying over Georgia, where the family used to live. This immediately brought tears to the eyes of the children who still missed their friends. Instead of simply comforting them, the mother filed an angry complaint against the pilot for gross emotional negligence. She demanded that the airline begin checking passengers' relocation histories against flight routes to prevent such painful and tactless geographical announcements from happening again. 9. One traveler felt the safety demonstration was completely inappropriate, not because it was boring, but because it was unnecessarily graphic and anxiety-inducing. He complained that by explaining how to use an oxygen mask and a life vest, the airline was planting negative thoughts and manifesting a disaster. He believed the crew should focus only on positive outcomes and that discussing emergency procedures was basically tempting fate. He wanted a refund for the emotional distress caused by being prepared for an emergency. 10. A passenger on a budget airline submitted a complaint because his complimentary cup of water was served without a lemon wedge. He argued that even though the flight cost him less than a tank of gas, certain standards of civility must be maintained. He wrote a detailed email explaining that water without citrus is basically just survival fluid, and that the absence of a simple lemon slice showed a fundamental disrespect for the passenger's palate, and was indicative of the airline's moral and culinary decline. 11. A man flying through the Rocky Mountains filed a complaint due to turbulence. Not because he was scared, but because he found the bumpy ride unprofessional. He wrote that he understood there was weather, but he expected the pilot to be skilled enough to navigate around the bumps. He compared the pilot to a bad taxi driver and demanded a partial refund for what he called a sloppy and undignified journey, as if the pilot could have simply chosen a smoother, freshly paved cloud road to take instead. 12. One passenger was so displeased with the aircraft's interior design that she wrote a multi-page complaint letter. She argued that the cabin's color palette, a standard mix of blues and grays, was emotionally draining and creatively oppressive. She claimed this lack of aesthetic consideration put her in a negative mindset that ruined the first 2 days of her vacation. Her suggestion was that the airline should offer flights with different themed interiors, allowing passengers to choose a cabin that matches their desired emotional state. 13. A passenger was watching the clouds from his window seat and became increasingly disappointed. He later wrote a complaint stating that the clouds, when viewed up close, were wispy, transparent, and structurally unimpressive. He had apparently expected them to look like the solid, fluffy, cotton ball-like structures depicted in cartoons. He accused the airline of providing a subpar cloud viewing experience and felt that he had been misled about the true nature of the sky. 14. A businessman became increasingly agitated during a flight because the person sitting across the aisle from him was reading a book he personally disliked. He didn't complain to the person, of course. He complained to the airline. He insisted that the airline should have a screening process for carry-on literature, banning books with what he called lowbrow subject matter from being visible in the cabin. He felt that being forced to look at the tacky cover art diminished the value of his first-class ticket. 15. It was this passenger's 40th birthday, a fact he made sure to mention to the flight attendant 3 separate times. When the flight ended with no public acknowledgement of his milestone, he was furious. He complained that the captain had failed to wish him a happy birthday over the intercom to the entire plane. He felt this lack of a personal, plane-wide shout-out was a major service failure that showed the airline didn't truly value its customers as individuals on their special day. 16. A passenger paid extra for a window seat over the wing and was bitterly disappointed. Why? Because the wing was, in his words, just a wing. He complained that for the entire 5-hour flight, his view was of a boring plain white surface. He had apparently expected something more visually stimulating. In his complaint, he suggested the airline should paint murals on their wings or install small TV screens on them to provide entertainment for those seated in the middle of the plane. 17. This complaint is for all the coffee lovers out there. A woman was outraged that the flight crew was brewing and serving coffee in the cabin. Not because she wasn't offered any, but because she despises the smell of coffee. She claimed the aggressive, pervasive aroma infiltrated her personal space and gave her a migraine. She demanded that in the future, airlines should either exclusively serve odorless hot beverages, or build a special, hermetically sealed coffee containment zone at the rear of the aircraft. 18. On a flight from Dallas to London on a major American carrier, a passenger became deeply unsettled when the pilot made his welcome announcement with a very clear, very charming British accent. The passenger later filed a complaint, stating that hearing a non-American accent in the cockpit of an American plane made him question the entire operation. He felt it was misleading and implied that the airline was cutting corners by hiring foreign pilots, completely ignoring the fact that pilots are trained to international standards. 19. You've heard people complain about not enough overhead bin space, but this is the opposite. A man was annoyed that the bin directly above his seat was completely empty. He wrote that the vast, cavernous void made him feel unsettled, as if he'd forgotten to pack a crucial bag. He complained that the airline's failure to ensure all bins were comfortably and uniformly full created an atmosphere of emptiness and anxiety, and he seriously suggested that they use dummy luggage to fill in the gaps. 20. A passenger spent most of his flight attempting the crossword puzzle in the in-flight magazine and failed miserably. His frustration didn't end there. He wrote a formal complaint to the airline, accusing them of intellectual elitism. He claimed the puzzle was impossibly difficult and was clearly designed to make passengers feel inferior. His solution? The airline should offer puzzles with varying difficulty levels, or better yet, just pre-fill most of the answers to give travelers a confidence-boosting sense of accomplishment. 21. A woman flying from Phoenix to Seattle, who specifically booked a window seat on the left side of the plane, filed a complaint because the sun was on her side for the entire morning flight. She claimed the airline was responsible for giving her an uneven tan. She argued that for the price she paid, the pilot should have occasionally tilted the plane the other way to ensure all window seat passengers received equal sun exposure. Her demand? A voucher for a tanning salon to correct the imbalance. 22. After watching the pre-flight safety demonstration, one passenger felt the need to share his artistic critique with the airline. He complained that the animated video was uninspired and suffered from poor character development. He wrote that the bland, smiling characters lacked emotional depth, making it hard for him to connect with their life-or-death instructions. He even attached a 3-page suggestion on how they could improve the narrative arc of the woman puts on oxygen mask scene. Floss the 23. This next complaint is a masterclass in pre-flight panic. A passenger was seated and waiting for takeoff when the pilot made his introductory announcement, "Good morning, folks, this is your captain, Al Gamble, ready to get you to Denver." The passenger immediately unbuckled, stood up, and demanded to be let off the plane. He refused to fly with a pilot whose last name was Gamble, insisting it was a terrible omen. The crew's assurances that Captain Gamble had a perfect 30-year record did absolutely nothing to calm him down. 24. A woman in business class was offered a whole orange as part of her fruit plate. She examined it for a moment, then pushed her call button. When the flight attendant arrived, the woman held up the orange and said, "Well, I'm not going to peel this myself." When the attendant politely explained that this wasn't part of the service, the woman was horrified. Her subsequent complaint letter cited the imminent danger of getting citrus pulp under her fingernails and the unacceptable expectation of manual labor in a premium cabin. 25. One traveler was so unimpressed with the plane's exterior that he felt compelled to write about it. His complaint was that the aircraft was painted plain white. He wrote that this was incredibly lazy and boring, and that for a multi-million-dollar machine, he expected a little more pizzazz. He suggested the airline should hire custom artists to paint each plane with a unique, vibrant mural, arguing that flying on a blank canvas felt sterile and soulless, and he didn't feel he got the full spectacle for his ticket price. 26. It's all about the airflow for this next passenger. He filed a complaint against a flight attendant for walking too quickly down the aisle. He claimed her brisk pace created a disruptive wake of air that messed up his carefully styled hair and rustled the pages of his newspaper. He described her movements as aerodynamically inconsiderate and suggested that the crew should be trained in a specific, slower cabin walk to minimize air disturbance for seated passengers. 27. A tourist on his first international flight was extremely disappointed with the view from 38,000 feet. As the plane flew from Canada into the United States, he kept looking out the window, expecting to see a giant dotted line on the ground indicating the border. When he saw nothing but continuous landscape, he felt cheated. He complained to the airline that their route failed to provide the advertised scenic views of the international border, as if the pilot was supposed to follow the line on a map. 28. The sound of the landing gear extending is a normal part of any flight, but one passenger perceived it as a personal attack on his senses. He complained that the horrific grinding noise completely shattered the peaceful serenity of the descent. He described it as sounding like 1,000 rusty robots screaming in unison, and claimed it caused him immense psychological distress. He demanded the airline invest in silent landing gear technology, or at least provide a warning and noise-canceling headphones before the auditory assault begins. 29. While filling out a customs form, a passenger had to ask the flight attendant for a pen. He was given a simple, plastic, airline-branded ballpoint pen. He later wrote a scathing complaint about the pen's poor quality. He argued that its flimsy construction and uneven ink flow made his signature look weak and unauthoritative. He felt that providing such a cheap writing instrument was a sign of disrespect, and that a high-end airline should provide premium, weighted fountain pens to ensure passengers can sign important documents with the dignity they deserve. 30. Here's a new one. A complaint about the plane being too clean. A passenger on a brand new aircraft found the pristine condition of the cabin to be deeply unsettling. He wrote that the overpowering smell of disinfectant and the complete lack of any scuffs, scratches, or stains made him feel like he was in a sterile laboratory, not on an airplane. He claimed the soulless perfection of the new plane lacked the comforting, lived-in character of an older aircraft, and the experience felt cold and artificial. 31. On a mid-afternoon flight, a passenger was offered a complimentary bag of pretzels. He refused them, then later filed a complaint. His issue wasn't with the taste or quality, it was with the timing. He meticulously explained in his letter that pretzels are a quintessentially morning or late-night snack, and that serving them at 3 p.m. was culinary anarchy. He accused the airline of having a total disregard for snack chronology and suggested they hire a certified snack sommelier to ensure all in-flight treats are temporally appropriate. 32. A first-time flyer was glued to the window during ascent, but his wonder quickly turned to suspicion. He complained to the flight attendant, and later in writing, that the cars and houses on the ground appeared unrealistically small. He was convinced it was some kind of trick. He seriously proposed that the airline was using special, shrinking windows to create a false sense of altitude and save money on fuel by not flying as high. He demanded an explanation for this obvious optical illusion. 33. A passenger with a self-proclaimed eye for design was so offended by the flight attendant's uniforms that he claimed it ruined his entire trip. He described the polyester blend and color choice as a sartorial nightmare that aggressively clashed with the cabin's interior decor. He felt the outdated uniforms created an atmosphere of aesthetic despair and lowered the collective mood of the plane. His complaint included a hand-drawn sketch of a new, more fashion-forward uniform concept for the airline to consider. 34. A man watching the in-flight map on his screen became increasingly agitated. He noticed the flight path from New York to London wasn't a straight line, but a long, distinct curve heading north. He marched to the galley to complain, accusing the pilot of taking a purposefully inefficient scenic route that was wasting both his time and the airline's fuel. He helpfully drew a straight line on a cocktail napkin to show the crew the correct and more direct way to fly, apparently forgetting that he was traveling on a globe, not a laminated placemat map from a diner. 35. Forget the movie, this passenger was all about the safety card in the seat back pocket. He found the illustration so crude and poorly executed that he wrote a complaint about the lack of artistic integrity. He criticized the vacant, emotionless expressions on the faces of the characters bracing for impact, claiming they failed to convey the appropriate level of urgency. He felt the poor artwork showed the airline wasn't truly serious about safety and demanded they commission a real artist for the next version. Austria 36. During a perfectly routine flight, the captain made a standard announcement. Folks, we've reached our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. For one passenger, this was TMI. Too much information. He complained that, as someone with a mild fear of heights, he was perfectly happy not knowing the specific number. He argued that providing such a stark, terrifyingly large number was insensitive. He requested that pilots should use vaguer, more comforting language like, "We are now very, very high up." 37. A woman in economy class was furious when the beverage cart arrived at her row. Not because they were out of her preferred drink, but because its arrival interrupted her nap. She complained that the clanking of cans and rattling of ice was a deliberate and hostile act designed to disrupt passenger rest. She proposed a new system where passengers could hang a "Do Not Disturb" sign on their seat, making them invisible to the snack and beverage crew for the entire flight. 38. This traveler's complaint was about branding. The pilot introduced himself over the intercom as Captain Bob Williams. The passenger found this name to be unacceptably generic and boring. He wrote that for the price of a ticket, he expected a pilot with a name that inspired confidence and excitement, like Captain Steele or Captain Jetson. He felt Captain Bob Williams sounded more like an accountant than a man in charge of a multi-ton aircraft, and this lack of panache made him feel less safe. 39. The airplane lavatory is a marvel of engineering, but for one passenger, it was a chamber of horrors. He filed a formal complaint not about cleanliness, but about the flush. He described the powerful vacuum suction and its accompanying deafening roar as unnecessarily violent and apocalyptic. He claimed the experience was so startling that he was genuinely afraid a part of him might be pulled into the system. This, he argued, created a severe case of lavatory-induced anxiety, making him too terrified to hydrate for the rest of the flight. His demand? That the airline invest millions in developing a toilet with a more zen-like and emotionally considerate flushing mechanism. 40. One passenger found the smell of the airplane cabin to be deeply unsatisfying. Not that it smelled bad, but rather, it didn't smell like anything in particular. He complained that the generic, recycled air lacked a signature scent and felt like a missed branding opportunity. He suggested the airline should develop a bespoke ambient fragrance, perhaps a mix of sandalwood and citrus, to pump through the ventilation system, creating a more memorable and luxurious sensory experience, much like a high-end hotel lobby. 41. Have you ever noticed the chime that sounds when the seatbelt sign turns on or off? Well, one traveler did, and he hated it. He complained that the sharp, authoritarian ding was startling and gave him anxiety. He suggested that the airline replace it with something more soothing, like a gentle harp strum or the sound of a soft breeze. He felt the current sound was an aggressive interruption to his otherwise peaceful journey, and the airline was missing a key opportunity for a more zen-like passenger experience. 42. Here's a complaint about a flight that went too well. A man on a cross-country business trip was furious when his flight landed 25 minutes ahead of schedule. This early arrival completely threw off his meticulously planned airport pickup and meeting schedule. He accused the pilot and the airline of gross inconsideration for not sticking to the advertised arrival time. He argued that arriving early was just as unprofessional as arriving late and demanded compensation for the chaos it caused his afternoon. 43. This has to be one of the most terrifyingly clueless complaints ever. A passenger in a window seat over the wing hit the call button in a full-blown panic. He was frantically pointing out the window, telling the flight attendant that a big piece of the wing is breaking off. He was, of course, referring to the wing flaps extending for landing. Despite the crew's calm explanation, he later filed a complaint about the alarming mechanical failures and the staff's shockingly casual attitude towards the plane disintegrating in midair. 44. A business traveler complained that his fold-down tray table was woefully inadequate for a modern professional. He was outraged that it couldn't comfortably accommodate his 17-inch laptop, his meal, a beverage, and his work documents all at the same time. He called it a fundamental design flaw in modern aviation and accused the airline of discriminating against productive people. His complaint letter even included a detailed diagram of his proposed multi-level, expandable tray table design. 45. One woman filed a complaint against her seatmate for his excessively rhythmic breathing. She claimed the steady, deep breaths of the man sleeping next to her were hypnotic and deeply distracting, preventing her from concentrating on her book. She felt the airline should have a policy against obtrusive sleeping patterns, and suggested they could screen passengers and group all the loud breathers together in a designated section of the plane, away from more sensitive travelers. 46. A passenger on a winter flight out of Denver watched in horror as the de-icing truck began spraying the wings with bright orange fluid. He didn't see a critical safety procedure. He saw a brazen act of vandalism. He frantically called the flight attendant, insisting that a rogue employee was tagging the plane with graffiti right before takeoff. His subsequent written complaint accused the airline of having lax tarmac security, and he demanded to know what steps were being taken to prevent this kind of pre-flight artistic terrorism from happening again. 47. Here's one that defies the laws of physics. A passenger flying east from California to New York was enraged that the 5-hour flight caused him to lose 3 hours of his day upon arrival. He filed a formal complaint accusing the airline of time theft. He simply could not grasp the concept of time zones and was convinced the airline was operating on some kind of accelerated schedule to cut costs. He genuinely demanded that the airline compensate him for his 3 missing hours. 48. Upon hearing the standard cabin announcement, "Flight attendants, please arm doors and cross-check," one passenger became extremely alarmed. He interpreted arm doors as a literal command for the crew to arm themselves with weapons. He spent the entire flight watching the flight attendants with nervous suspicion, convinced he was on some sort of high-risk prisoner transport. He later complained about the airline's use of unnecessarily militaristic and threatening language that created an atmosphere of imminent danger. 49. A passenger in economy was disappointed with his complimentary blanket. His complaint? It wasn't a weighted blanket. He argued that in today's high-stress world, a simple fleece throw was completely insufficient for achieving proper in-flight relaxation. He claimed that the lack of a therapeutic, pressure-applying weighted blanket caused him deep-seated anxiety and prevented him from achieving REM sleep. He suggested the airline was woefully behind the times on modern wellness trends. 50. A young man purchased in-flight Wi-Fi and was absolutely enraged when it wasn't fast enough to support his high-stakes online video game tournament. He claimed the subpar ping rate and unacceptable latency caused him to lose a critical match, resulting in a demotion in his virtual ranking and significant emotional trauma. He demanded the airline not only refund his Wi-Fi fee, but also compensate him for the incalculable damage done to his online gaming reputation. 51. One passenger on a red-eye flight became increasingly agitated while looking out his window. He called the flight attendant over and, in a hushed, conspiratorial whisper, complained that the moon had been aggressively following the plane for over 3 hours. He was dead serious. He believed it was some kind of sophisticated surveillance drone and demanded the pilot perform evasive maneuvers to shake their celestial stalker. The flight attendant's explanation about orbital mechanics was dismissed as a flimsy cover story for a massive lunar surveillance operation. 52. A woman on a cross-country flight was furious that her seat didn't have a window. She demanded to be moved, complained to the flight attendant, and later wrote a scathing review. The problem? She had specifically booked and was sitting in an aisle seat. When the crew politely explained that aisle seats, by definition, are next to the aisle and not the window, she accused them of deceptive marketing. Apparently, she expected some sort of pop-up window to emerge from the armrest, giving her a personal, aisle-exclusive view of the clouds. 53. During the safety briefing, one gentleman took serious issue with the instructions for the brace position. He didn't question its effectiveness, he questioned its dignity. He later complained that being told to bend over and place his head between his knees was an utterly humiliating posture. He argued that in the unlikely event of a crash, he would much rather meet his end sitting upright like a gentleman with a stiff upper lip. He felt the airline was prioritizing survival over maintaining a basic level of decorum in a crisis. 54. A woman flying with her certified emotional support golden retriever was deeply concerned about her pet's well-being. She complained to the crew that the dog was showing clear signs of flight anxiety. Her proposed solution? She was genuinely shocked and appalled that the airline didn't offer an emotional support animal for her emotional support animal. She argued that a secondary, smaller therapy creature, perhaps a guinea pig, was the logical next step in passenger care, and that the airline's failure to provide a multi-layered emotional support system was a stunning oversight. 55. After a flight to Seattle, a woman marched to the customer service desk to complain about her entire vacation. Her issue? It had been raining. She was furious that the airline had not personally warned her about the city's famously dreary weather when she booked her ticket months in advance. She accused the airline of engaging in a conspiracy of omission, believing they deliberately hid the weather forecast from her to secure the sale. She demanded a full refund for both her flight and her non-refundable hotel. And that concludes our descent into the abyss of aviation complaints. From blaming pilots for the weather to accusing the moon of espionage, it seems the sky is truly the limit for human absurdity. These stories prove that sometimes the most turbulence you'll experience on a flight has nothing to do with the air. Now I have to ask, after that lineup of pure chaos, which one of these complaints officially wins the gold medal for the most mind-bogglingly absurd? Cast your vote and defend your champion in the comments below. If these stories made you laugh, question reality, or just feel better about your own travel experiences, hit that like button and subscribe for more journeys into the wonderfully weird.